If we look at the treatment of Muslim women, or the narrative around Islam and Muslim women in the United States, it comes from within the political establishment. The same one that wants to do what? Protect Muslim women from Muslim men in the Middle East. So in 2001, the justification for the invasion of Afghanistan, while it was, the stated goals were the eradication of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and limiting terrorism from having actual geographic space, the justification was couched in gender terms. It was about the liberation of Afghan women from Afghan men. What feminist theorists will say, it's the liberation of brown women from the abuse of brown men by white men and white women. The very congressmen in the United States who were pushing for the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, but especially Afghanistan, for the liberation of Afghan women, are the same congressmen who are curtailing women's reproductive rights in the United States.
The restrictions on women's freedoms in Afghanistan are unfathomable to most Americans. Women are banished from working. Girls are not allowed to attend school. Women and girls cannot venture outside without a burqa, which they are forced to wear.
We might talk about the victimization of women in certain areas, but we erase the real victimization, which is war economies, and prolonged warfare. What we don't count is the cost to mothering, the cost to the family, the cost of 20 years of not being able to be certain about the future, 20 years of drone warfare and drone strikes. What does that do to everyday life? Some of the most emotional interviews we have out of Afghanistan is women talking about how much they fear clear skies, because clear skies mean drone strikes. So the question is this really about women and the protection of women? Or is it that we have become comfortable with looking at women over there very differently than we talk about women in general? Muslim American women are the second most highly educated minority group. Muslim American women are the second most economically stable minority group. Number one in gender parity in terms of earning income. During the past 5 years of the kind of rise of Islamophobia and in the era of Trump, the FBI, CIA data, Southern Poverty Law Center, and CNN said that this was the most violent time period for Muslim American community, where the targets were the physical manifestations of Islam. Women who wear headscarves, mosques, and Sikh men who are often confused as for being Muslim. And so women actually dealt with the most violent, and we're not talking about attacks, verbal attacks, but physical attacks. We saw a 500% increase on physical attacks on Muslim women. And this was couched in the language that we heard on TV of, we can't trust Muslims, Muslims have no space in government, Islam hates us, and that extended into the social political landscape of the United States. Anti-Muslim sentiment rose to the highest levels, even more so, 10 times more than it was after 9/11. And so this led to the political language couched in Islamophobic terms that took what used to be marginal and Islamophobic and anti-Muslim sentiments and made them mainstream. There is a continued narrative of testing Americanness against Muslim identity. There are two visible Muslim members of Congress today. However, they deal with the most vicious Islamophobic attacks, not just from the general public, but also from within the political establishment. And they are those that not just have verbal attacks on Twitter, but have alleged threats of to violence and death threats. What we're seeing today is the narrative of suspect citizens. And the suspect citizens continue to be minority groups, primarily Muslim American and Muslim American women. So the intersection of those identities, while we see that Muslim women are increasing in visibility, they're also becoming the most targets of some of the most visceral hate. choosing the most visibly different, which is a headscarf, no matter how fashionable, becomes the holding on to the white power nationalist rhetoric that is gaining ground throughout Europe and the United States. In 2010, there was a hysteria that emerged just before the midterm election around the so-called Ground Zero Mosque, a building that was going up in New York City, not at Ground Zero, and indeed was not a mosque. But the political establishment, or members of what would become the political establishment, were saying that there's a victory mosque being built in New York City on hallowed ground. And this narrative took place throughout the course of the summer. The hysteria led to the rise of more radical elements of the right who rode this into the November election. The weaponization of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim narratives. The other is coming, the other is everywhere, and we need voices from the right to move into politics and in governance positions to protect us from the other. And today the most visible other in Europe is a Muslim woman with a headscarf. And so the question is, why does increased Islamophobic rhetoric from within the political establishment lead to the successful election of members of the right? This is the lesson we learned from the United States. It works.